So welcome to the Diary of a CTO. My guest today is Swen-Helge Huber, Senior Director at Solis. Sven, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Good. I am very well, thank you, sir. Very well indeed. And good festive spirits. So Sven, you have, I think, fair to say, a very impressive career. You've held senior technical and leadership positions across a range of different areas, including systems architecture, consultative pre-sales, software development, as well as people in technology leadership. And you've done those roles in some of the biggest names in enterprise technology. So working with companies like Sun Microsystems, Tibco, Software AG, and Talend, to name a few. So really great to have you here with us today. And just really keen to hear a little bit more about your story and your approach to your career. So let's start at the beginning, if we may. Talk us through your career to date. How did you get into tech in the first place? And I guess how you've arrived at where you are today at Solis.
All right. Yeah. So how did I arrive here? Very accidental. So it's one thing that when we talked, I asked is it worthwhile also talking about like people kind of having a predefined career path in their mind and working through that, or kind of people who go with the flow and opportunity. So I think maybe we can talk about that later a little bit as well. But my career path was more the accidental route, right? So I grew up in a small town in southern Germany. I moved to Berlin, as many people from down where I grew up in do, to find the big world.
Yeah.
And I actually was more into sound engineering, and that was what I wanted to do. And I kind of accidentally ended up in IT. So this is a long time ago now. And actually, I remember this, like I went to uni there, and someone went like, I wrote an email to someone in the US, and I went like, kind of, what are you doing? Why would you write, like, who needs this, right? So this was me, IT, like back in the 90s. And, but I ended up working for a small company that started to do internet stuff. So they did software development, and then the World Wide Web started to evolve. And I kind of started working for them, and I slid more into IT than kind of being a conscious move, right?
Okay.
So that's how I ended up there. So essentially, I was just like some people I knew from the pub had a job, and I slid into IT that way. And I look at that kind of like more like my apprenticeship years, right? So I crawled around doing network cabling, and I built like web pages by hand, as you did back in the day, and all this kind of stuff. And it's so that I slid into the IT world, and I essentially also then kind of got a computing degree. But it was like everything was more that was very accidental, I would say.
Okay.
Right?
Did you enjoy it from the early days? Was it something you kind of had a passion for? Or is it something you kind of had to work at because you felt it was
it was good fun. So all of this was good fun. And then actually, so the company I worked for started out in TV production. So they built essentially software solutions for game shows and stuff like that.
Okay.
So that was really interesting because I spent a good bit of time near TV studios and in TV production. So that was my more exciting part of my career, I would say, like, because there was a good few, like it wasn't very corporate, and it was very, very enjoyable. So that made me do that degree. And I spent a lot of time more on this front-endy type stuff. So somehow, and this goes back to like, somehow I ended up in places. So I started doing a lot of web development. I ended up working in Ireland for a bit by just kind of pinging people. Right, this was still the late 90s, so you could essentially just email a company that does something with the web in Ireland, because there were only like 60 of them or something like that, right? So I was just kind of like, try this, let's see what happens. So I was very, very much in web development. And when I finished my degree, I was actually in a position where I already, I was responsible for the front end development for what was then the portal of the city of Berlin. So Berlin.de. That was my first kind of where I slid into the grown, like in the full, into full employment without studying on the side, right?
Okay.
So that was my last stop in web development, and it was actually pretty like it was Berlin.de, and it was like the late 90s, early 2000s. So that was quite a high profile portal, as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Public-private partnership as well. So a lot of intersection with, well, obviously it wasn't as digital as it is today. When you go onto gov.uk and you can do whatever you want and whatever you need. But this kind of stuff like services to citizens over the web started to happen. So that was quite cool.
Yeah.
And I ended up by accident, like the team leader left and I became like the master, what would we call it? The senior producer. So the senior web producer. And I started like building out a little team and hiring a lot of contractors as well for different like projects and so on. So that was the first time I kind of stepped up more into a leadership position. And then I thought, because I had an IT degree, but it was all very much front end work I did. So it seemed like a good idea at the time to go a little bit deeper into technology rather than, and to be honest, like I did web design and I did like proper, how should I say that? It was front end design. There was a design element to it, and I'm not a good designer. Like I'm a techie designer, so I can kind of build clean things and I can define clean things and nice boxes and so on and clear pictures. But I'm not a designer, so I knew like most probably it'll be better to go on gravitate towards the back end or the software engineering side, the software architecture and so on, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up working as a consultant in Germany. So I did the usual, like, there's also one thing that I think is really important. I did a lot of, when I slid into kind of like an IT consulting company that was relatively small German consulting company. And they had a lot of contracts for providing training for vendors. So back then that was like we did trainings for IBM. I did a couple of BA training session programs as well for customers. So that changed my perspective quite a bit. So this is something like from what I've done, that is it was pretty eye-opening to be put on the spot, having to walk people through things, keep them all on board. And it's not like it's not like school where where the teacher will, like, as always, the grades that you can apply. Teachers can always use grades to apply pressure, right? Adult education is not like that because they're gonna grade you, or in this case, me, right? So that changed a lot. Like you have lots of people with different proficiency levels in technology, and you need to get them all together and get them to an acceptable outcome. So they're going to give you like the 8, 9s, and 10s that you want on the feedback forms, right?
Yeah.
So that was quite a good thing, right? And then I worked in software, like more in a software engineering role and a bit of architecture, but like more software engineering development as a consultant as well. Essentially, like as you do, like you get shipped out on a project and you spend like a year in Munich or 2 or something like that. So that's what I did, right? And maybe one thing to learn from that as well, so which kind of actually it scared me off for life, from very large software projects, or a specific type of very large software projects, which is like greenfield, let's reinvent a whole company's business and write it all new in software, which is essentially what I was stuck in.
Right.
And I'm not sure if it ever succeeded, but it was very, how should I put it? It was just so complex, and you could never see anything inside that where you'd see success. Like, is it finished now? Will this be finished? Will it actually work at all? So a large number of developers, architects, teams, all kind of working together to build something completely new and ripping out like the whole process flows of the organization. That is something where I kind of pivoted more towards the product. Like, as you look at my CV, you'll see like a lot of roles for software vendors, and that's where I pivoted towards software vendors. It wasn't that much a conscious. It wasn't that much of a conscious move, but in a lot of the interviews I got back we're essentially like, hey, we're pre-sales roles, and the fact that I can express myself halfway decently in English and in German, so that worked like for a lot of the the company I ended up with was called CBeyond, which then was bought by Sun Microsystems, but they essentially had like a European team of pre-sales specialists, and that's where I ended up. Right, that's how I moved to UK.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, that's really. I think it's always really interesting to hear the sort of thought process that people go through, and like I said, it's nice to hear sometimes people just sort of following their sort of instincts and following the gut as you go through, and yeah, call it accidental, call it whatever you will. But did you find the transition? You mentioned there the training element was very eye opening, but did you find the transition from being a strong engineer and technologist through to a leader of people? Did you find that a difficult transition, and were there particular skills that you kind of felt you had to hone and develop in yourself to become an effective leader?
Yeah, so this is like, I spent a long time in kind of working for software vendors, and then it's also quite a while back now. I worked as this is the only CTO role I've ever held, which was probably the badge that got me here. I'm not sure, but so there's this fast forwarding through a lot of things. I ended up working for a small, or I was part of the management team of a very small software. You call them a system integrator or a software consultancy in Ireland. It's essentially a guy I knew. They were 5 people when I joined them, and they got their first stab at building, getting a pretty large customer on board that was also the man in the middle to a very large multinational corporation, right? So it was a big step up for them, and that's when I came in, right? So it was literally like 5 desks, 5 people somewhere in Dublin. And so what we had to do was, number one is like, this is when you step up to the leadership position there, it's like, for me, it's like, it was a small company, but they were already working on smaller projects together. So the first thing, like, if leadership, from my point of view, is like, first you need to go in and figure out what are all these people doing and how are they doing things, and kind of address them where they are, right? So, like, for instance, like I did have a strong technology background, so I could have gone in and said, like, this is how we're going to do it, and we're not going to use the stuff you're using for your projects right now, the frameworks, the tools. We're going to use what I'm used to, right? Because I've been in the space, I've worked for vendors, I know kind of the tools I like, and also why customers are buying them. So I could have gone in, but I deliberately kind of went and have them lead on certain technology choices, right? And went with what the team was comfortable with. So that's one thing, is like, kind of you go in, you see what's there, and you figure out how to work with what's there and then grow it. That's kind of the leadership, like how I would look at it. And then it's time to bring in kind of processes and like, once you scale up a team from 5 people to 10 people, you need to have build like all of the stuff that you need to have, like build processes, all the CI/CD stuff and what we have these days, right?
Yeah.
So that's like, then you bring in all the technology and make all the technology, the testing procedures, all of the software development processes. You need to put some rules around that. But it's like, I'm always like, for me, it's important. And this is also like, I'm not leading people right now, but when I interact, like, you essentially, like, we're enabling people to do things, right? And from a leadership perspective, I also see this, like, I need to enable them to do things. And that also means I need to give people degrees of freedom. If I go in and say, like, this is how we're going to do things from today on, and this is where you fit in, and this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to do it. This doesn't work well with knowledge workers. So that's kind of like what really drives me is like, what's crucial to me is to kind of create conditions for things to happen. And that has a degree of like guardrails, but a lot of degrees of freedom for people as well.
Yeah.
Because you get better engagement and better results from people that way as well, from my point of view.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice way of phrasing it, actually, sort of creating the right conditions for good things to happen. That definitely echoes my sort of leadership style. I've never been a particularly kind of dictatorial leader, but I think that, like you said, if you can enable your job, to me as a leader, is to help other people be successful, and in turn, they obviously help you be successful, right? So I think that's a really nice way to phrase it. But interested to get your take on, throughout your career, you obviously worked for large international software vendors through to smaller startups, like you just mentioned, in Ireland. How have you had to adapt your approach between those two types of organizations? And would you say there are any sort of key takeaways that you've gleaned throughout your journey?
So the one key takeaway is that I avoid working for large or smaller German companies. So that's the first thing. So I've been here for 20 years and I'm happy. So that's okay. Like now seriously, one thing I've learned is like, I qualified, but still, like how I look at it is like, actually it's pretty much the same, because like when you end up in a large corporation, it depends on which part of the corporation you end in, right? It's like it's the culture. Like you've got teams and you've got pockets, you've got product divisions that just work others than others. So it's a kind of, for me, it's like, it's not a clear delineation to say like, oh, startups are exciting because you can do there's much more freedom to do things and to shape things and think outside of the box. And when you're in a large enterprise, it's going to be like very siloed. And I found that you need to find pockets where change can happen, and that can happen in large corporations as well. So that's the one thing. Like if I look at like the quintessential, like, or the conclusion is like, I don't look at the company size when I look for like to change career or to change position. I'm not looking at like, are they big, are they smaller? Like I'm looking at the people I'm going to work with and how they interact with the leadership around them, right? That's really the lesson I've learned. So generally, like you could say, of course, like smaller startups tend to be, or smaller companies who are in the scale up phase, like where I'm working at right now, we're 500 people roughly. Like there is more degrees of freedom and less clearly defined roles and so on. So that the setting can be more conducive to innovation and to and to be more productive than in the corporate environment. But I don't think it's a hard and fast rule.
No, I think that's a very fair point, and interesting that you've obviously worked extensively across both. And the sort of takeaway there, I thought it still comes down to the people at the end of the day and how they communicate and the people that you're working alongside. Which I think is a very interesting point. You've obviously worked in some of these kind of highly complex enterprise environments. Naturally, there will be more moving parts rather than a startup, I guess. But how do you, in your experience, how do you go about fostering the right culture in terms of communication and collaboration when you might have kind of distributed engineering and architectural teams? Are there any particular approaches that you take to foster that kind of culture?
It has become like a little bit more difficult. Back in the day when I was actually the only one remote when I worked for Greenfinch in Dublin. So I tended to travel quite a bit, so to get in and see people, right? But that's, of course, this has all changed, right? And today it's like, even if opportunities for travel arise, like people go like, do we really need to do that, right? So it used to be that I'd kind of try and be with the team as well. So if they were co-located, then I'll try and get closer to that. Now it really depends. Like, so from my point of view, what I try to do is So if I was to lead a development squad again, or an architecture team, I most probably force them to do a lot of like regular touch points, just like water cooler stuff. Like that's the thing, is like when you're in the office, there's a lot of water cooler stuff going on, a lot of things kind of happening outside of official communication channels. So how do you build these? And that's when, and that's also hard how I try to interact with my colleagues these days. Is like we're all pretty much distributed. So we've got like the teams, even the team I'm in is scattered across me in Europe, and then they're scattered across the States and Canada. So it's all different time zones. And I really try and set up like just regular chats and one-on-ones with people and things like that to keep it going. It is incredibly, I find it like, it also depends on the personality type. Some people kind of miss the water cooler a lot. Some people actually want to get their head down and work through things, and they're actually quite happy to have, they don't need that strong connection with people because their connection is with their laptop and their code or their architecture diagrams or whatnot, right?
Yeah. But I think it's a great point you make, that effective leaders just create that opportunity, like that chance for those more organic connections to happen. Because I think you're right. As I mentioned to you before, we've largely been a fully remote business. But the difference between when we do create those opportunities to get together in person, the difference in terms of the quality of interaction that you get versus, the day in, day out through Teams, through Zoom, I think is night and day. So, like I said, there's no, I don't think we're going back to where we were pre-pandemic, of course, with everyone in the office all the time, but I also feel that those fully remote businesses do need to create those moments where people do connect, because it's such an integral part, I think, of how you identify with the companies that you work for, and the kind of loyalty that you have to the brand and the people.
Yeah, and it is incredibly, like, to create informal interactions remotely is super hard, right? So that's kind of, it sometimes works better than others, but it is hard. So it's also like you're missing a lot of the body language, right? So when you go off, and when it's time for a big British whinge, that's really tough to have. Like, that happens at a water cooler, but like on a conference call, everyone goes like, "Are we doing this or not?"
Is that what you like about the British culture versus the German culture? Having a good old whinge.
Well, there are a lot of things about it. It's not my top thing I like about British culture, to put it that way. But it's time to, like, oh well, Germans like to complain a lot as well, right? But that's a universal trait.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Out of interest, what was it that you kind of fell in love with in terms of working more for kind of British types of organisations, and without being sort of too generic, I guess, and tarring everyone with the same brush? But was there a particular sort of thing that spoke to you about the culture of kind of British business?
So, I kind of see, like, when you say British, like most of the time I worked, like they were actually like so US.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. So with then you get the twist, because like as we know, a lot of companies are European headquarters are here or over in Ireland. There is, like, I think this has changed, but what the stark difference was, like, it was when I left Germany, everything was still very formal and very, like, so you couldn't get by without knowing German back then,
right?
As when you're working in Germany, right? So it was, and it's all this kind of like, you and these are like, it's a bit superficial here and there, but it's like, if I don't have to call someone Mr. Smith or Herr Schmidt, then I can call them by their first name, right?
Yeah.
There's a bit of more of informality around it, and I know there are other rules, and like in the British culture, a lot of stuff kind of is more subtle, right? And that's like also like a steep learning curve still to get all the nuances of that. But it was more informal and kind of more collaborative environment as well.
I see. Interesting.
So I found it, and this has changed tremendously. So when I go back to Germany, I remember pre-sales engagements where I went back and ended up in the middle of Bavaria, and I was like, there were all these people speaking all kinds of languages at Adidas. This was at Adidas. there are people speaking English on the campus. Like, I don't think like 20 years ago that it would have been like that, right? So there would have been pockets of like internationality, but it was like, I don't think anyone could have survived in a large corporation in Germany without knowing German at that stage. Even in IT, where like ironically, like most documentation, everything you dealt with would have still been in English, right? But so that's really what I found interesting when I moved over, or what motivated me is like this kind of like, of course, it seems a bit more, things are a lot more fluid and flexible.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I've never worked in Germany, but I've got a very good friend who actually works for Rolls-Royce, and he's bilingual.
Yeah.
Kind of does talk about the kind of formalities that exists in Germany even today. But that's actually really interesting to get your sort of take on it. Let's delve down a little bit more into kind of your thoughts around, I suppose, technology and the evolution of it. You've obviously, a lot of your experience lies in the middleware space, and lived through the rise of SOA, EAI, and now I suppose we're moving more towards event-driven microservices and that sort of thing. So what would you say have been some of the biggest sort of architectural lessons and mindset shifts that you've learned along the way?
So there's one thing about technology which I find kind of puzzling, or not puzzling. It's interesting, but it's all very cyclical. So you see solutions coming and go, like in architectural terms as well. You see things happening in one way, and then everyone goes like, no, we need to do this completely different way. And you have a new architecture paradigm. People build stuff, and then it kind of flows back. Back in the day when I started in the middleware space, there was like I was in this IBM training course, and the instructor went, like at the beginning everything was mainframe, and then it was client server. So you had like a database, and you had the client, and now we have this web stuff. And essentially it is just like the old school terminals, like one big mainframe and a lot of terminals hanging off it. Just the internet is in between it. So it kind of goes from very like more distributed architecture to something more monolithic, and it goes to and from, right? Generally, I think like clearly like distributed and architectures are where things are going, like with multi-cloud customers. Like this is a lot what we currently deal with is like customers use different hyperscalers, Amazon, Azure, and so on, right? They still have on-premise. How do you connect all of that? So it's a distributed. It's clearly going towards the trend over time. Of course, has been like that. It's systems become much more distributed and geographically distributed, as well as in like how they're hosted, how systems and services are hosted. So that's a thing I can see. But it kind of like right now we're going back like so. And this is not my marketing hat I'm wearing for the company I work for right now, but we're going back to something we call it like event-driven integration. What you say, like, so you have like these, what you just mentioned, you have like little event microservices, so consuming events, publishing new events, and all of these things talk to each other. There's like an idea of like doing integration that way. So out of your big SAP ERP system, you just push data out as events, so it becomes like an event-driven integration platform, right? Funnily enough, this is how I built systems when I came to the UK, because that was essentially like we did not have like we actually every single POC I did when I worked for CBeyond was that pattern. Here's something that talks to a system, it pushes out events, and something else goes, oh, these are interesting events. Let me push this into another database, right? And the difference is that it's all becoming much more distributed. So underneath, where previously I was like, it was all on premise in one place, it's now just completely distributed. So I see like the same patterns repeating themselves, but there's also like what I see often as a danger is like there's an architectural pattern for enterprises or for like at any level, the applications, enterprise architecture, and so on, where you say like, oh, from today we're going to do it in this way, and this is the right way. And typically there is not the right way, right? When we say this is actually what I'm doing right now, is I'm saying it's my role in Solus is to say, yeah, everything needs to be event-driven. Architecture is a good approach, and there's lots of reasons in terms of decoupling, in terms of efficiency, network efficiencies, event routing, and so on. But people are still using APIs because that's what they're used to, and they are good for certain things. So you need to bring things together rather than going like it's the cycle of like, oh, we're going to do everything this way, and it doesn't work, and then we're going to swing back and say, oh, we're going to do everything that way. That is not a good cycle to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always, I guess, the pragmatic blend, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the bit that you can't really explain. Like there's like where you can try and foster that in people as well, to see like look for opportunities and look at things, but it is a hard perspective to teach. To be pragmatic. Like I come from a country where a lot of people have never learned how to be pragmatic.
I'd like to put on that thread a little bit about the traits within people, because you've obviously mentioned you've hired a number of people over the years, and I know the skills required obviously will vary largely from role to role and skill set to skill set. But when you hire people, are there particular overarching traits, characteristics, sort of personality traits or values that you look for in people to join you?
I need them to be curious and want to learn, right? And so there's one thing like where I really want to see, like, are they asking questions? So it's and what kind of questions are they asking? Are they interested in or are they? So, and I would look at that for that like in all kinds of like it doesn't matter seniority level, right? So it's like I just need that. That's the one thing I'm really interested in. Are they curious? And the other thing I'm looking for is, because I found that it isn't great to hire to a specification in terms of like, I need them to have experience in this programming language and in these 3 frameworks, because like these things come and go, right? Like especially like when you work in smaller companies and build software for other companies, like they may like programming languages, frameworks, everything might change because customers have preferences and there's licensing costs involved and all this stuff, right? So there's other practicalities. So I need to find out if people can take what they know and apply it to something different.
Yeah.
A different programming language, a different customer environment, a different type of industry. Can they actually take what they know and apply it to something that they haven't done before?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially in the times we're living in now, right? Like, so the speed of which technology is evolving, different frameworks, libraries, languages, kind of a la mode today, and then another one is tomorrow. I totally agree with you, and that's often the advice I give to a lot of clients actually when recruiting and actually writing job specifications is try not to be too prescriptive, because ultimately a good engineer, in my eyes, will be able to code in one language as well as they will in another one, not maybe immediately, but very soon. So look past that, and totally agree. It's more about the values and the traits and the curiosity piece. I think that's also another really good point. And I think actually, in my eyes, something that's probably, it gets more and more important the more senior you hire people, because you tend to assume that everybody at the kind of junior end of the spectrum will be naturally curious because they don't know much, right? But that sort of trait of remaining interested, remaining curious, irrespective of your level of experience, and realizing there's still always further to go on your journey, I think is another really great point that you raised. So Sven, look, really enjoyed the conversation today. I think you shared a huge amount of value, and just really interested to hear a bit more about your journey. I like to draw to a close every episode, you may know by now, with the same question, if you would care to indulge me, which is, what would you say has been your one favorite piece of advice that you've received? It could be in a personal context, it could be in a career context, but something that you've received that stuck with you for the journey that you would care to pass on to your fellow human.
Okay, so you caught me out on that question a little bit, but I had time to think about it.
Let's keep you on taste.
And so there's one thing, like looking at also how did I end up where I am here today, is because I had ideas of what I wanted to do, but I also did adapt to what opportunities presented myself, right? And there's one piece of advice, or how it was described to me, is like kind of like some people go through life like they're boxers, right? So boxers are like, you need to have a lot of punch and a lot of strength, and then you're essentially bashing someone else's head in while they're trying to bash in yours. And that really works well when you're like a heavyweight boxer, but for many people it doesn't work well, right? So then you compare that to like martial arts, where essentially like people are using other people's strength against them, right? So it's like it's not about being strong and just confrontation. It is about kind of using the other people's momentum to your advantage, right? And that also means like I myself I don't really like to talk about myself, and I'm middle-aged and I'm not a fighter, but I as a fighter in a metaphorical sense, that means you need to be flexible and you need to have a flexible stance, right? And also, to wrap this up, I think this is also the way how you can change things, because if you're confrontational and you're trying to push things through, like you get counter pressure, and if you find cleverer ways, you can actually like change small things. But if you start changing small things, other things will change, and you get a flow of change happening without the big confrontation.
I like that. Yeah, I think it's a really nice way to draw to a close. You know, the metaphor of using people's inertia and guiding them in the right way, rather than being that sort of bulldozer. Like you said, I think is a really great point. Well, look, thank you again. Really enjoyed the conversation, and wish you all the very best in your role at Solace. And please do come back in, have another chat with us at some point in future. It'd be great to speak with you again. But for anyone listening that's enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, share it with anyone that you feel would gain value, and tune in again soon for the next episode of the Diary of a CTO.